and knowledgeable people. And our kickoff speaker today is one such person. Tory McCagg and her husband Carl came to Jaffrey from Providence almost a decade ago. And they came here very intentionally to create a new kind of life for themselves, which they describe as living off the grid. And they named their home Darwin's View. I'll leave it to Tory perhaps to explain why they picked that name for their home. I first met Tory several years ago. She and my wife, Virginia Eskin, were playing piano flute duets, and I thought she was a musician, which she is. She is also, however, a blogger, a writer. In fact, I asked her to bring her most recent book called At Crossroads with Chickens, which is about more than chickens. And she is a raiser of chickens and of crops, and a person with stories to share. I'm delighted to introduce the first speaker in this new series, Tory McCagg.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Becca, and the Jaffrey Civic Center for the opportunity to share what Carl and I have been up to at Darwin's View. We called it that because most people in their right minds would not have gone through what we've gone through to get up there and build a house. This is actually a view of us. That's such a great way of putting this out, as opposed to what one usually sees when you're in that house, which is a view of Mount Monadnock. But anyway, before I get too much into that, I'm going to read the first couple of pages of my book, At Crossroads with Chickens, a What If It Works adventure in off-grid living and quest for home, because it tells you about the place and the players. Darwin's View, like Mount Monadnock herself, is at the meeting point of Dublin and Jaffrey. Sorry about that. Though both towns lay claim to her, the mountain's home is in Jaffrey. So is mine. It has taken me a long time to get to the point that I can accept that. Darwin's View is my home. What began as a 24 by 38 foot timber frame house can be found at the end of what has been variously called a logging road, Patch 22 Drive, Mud Mountain, and Heartbreak Hill. If you follow the rise of that half-mile sinuous lane, cross over a barely discernible wetland, continue up and around an entirely legal, if remarkably steep, 9.2 grade curve, you will pass by my husband Carl's budding orchard and hops festooned flagpole and arrive at the top. There you will experience our panoramic view from north of North Monadnock to Mount Patuxent, westward along the hills of the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border, ending with the entirety of Mount Monadnock. Breathtaking. This is the house going up, so that's what's been going on. This is in 2012 when we put up our timber frame house. Breathtaking, especially if the wind is blowing, as it so often does, over the mountain, down into the valley, and up, smack into us. The wind, as representative of Mother Nature at her most willful and unforgiving, is a force to be reckoned with here, if only because Carl and I tend to remember too late how far unanchored items will fly. On blowy days, we've been found chasing a variety of objects across the field. A portable hot tub that is waiting to be repurposed. Styrofoam insulated panels, ditto. 2 chicken runs, a brand new pair of prescription eyeglasses, hay bales. Thus far, not the chickens. Though they are buffeted too by the wind, the chickens, as opposed to the humans, make sure to keep themselves snugly in their coop when the wind nears gale proportions. Even so, I have lain awake, listening to it howl, feeling the house shudder, convinced that this is my Dorothy of Oz moment, and the chickens are about to play the part of Toto. More than once, I've had to remind myself that this is not Kansas. Tornadoes don't happen in the mountains, or do they? Tornadoes are formed by rising warm air and dropping cold air twisting together into spirals. They are funnels of focused chaos that destroy anything and everything in their path. Flat plains to skyscrapers and mountains, Nothing stops a tornado's hunger but for destruction. Its winds are Mother Nature's, and she, as I have learned, does not care. She throws her fury, lashes out her outrage like a cat o' nine tails whip. The consequence of the violence is all equal to her because she is a woman scorned. She is outraged. There is no safe place, no hope, and it's right about here, full stop, that if Carl had his way, he would stop me. It happens on a daily basis. I get upset with myself or the world around me, and I go on a bender of, dare I say, negativity. In reaction to yet another outrage in the news or a passing thought on which I hitch onto, I might go so far as to reject the avocado sandwich that Carl has lovingly prepared for me. He in turn will study me with his New Hampshire blue eyes, shake his head, and admonish me. Don't blame your lunch, Tory. It's not its fault. I berate myself because he's right. That's like blaming cows for the world's methane problem. Nicknames Carl has earned over the years. Iron Man, because he's a mind over body kind of guy. White whale, with his burly body and burning sun skin. Cagliacci, toned with the fondness and love of those who know him, feel for this fellow, who is ever willing to help, fix, care. More recently, he has earned the moniker of Compost Carl. Besides his trombone and me, his compassion is returning what came from the earth to the earth. Carl with his long blonde to white eyebrows and dimples that promise jovial good ship fellowship. All this as opposed to me. I called a friend about exactly this contrast. I was in the midst of a fit of anxiety, having endured yet another social situation during which Carl somehow found topics of conversation to discuss while I stood mum and smiling stiffly, stymied by what to say, thereby leaving the impression of cool aloofness, possibly unfriendliness, and horror's rudeness. Am I at all likable? I asked Deej, who has known me since we were both in our 20s. He laughed kindly, and not because he didn't realize how close to tears I was, but because he did know that and found it endearing. Carl's like an open book, Deej said. He's accessible, full of ideas. You're not like a wetsuit. A person has to pull you on, test you out, see how you fit. It's more of a commitment getting to know you. I had never been called a wetsuit before, but it made perfect sense. In fact, I liked the idea because it worked both ways. People had to try me out, but that extra skin protected me, kept people away until I could trust them. In the meantime, my wetsuit and I appeared to be confident, organized and directed. My life with very tense body, rosy and gaunt-cheeked complexion, and seeming ability to create a meal out of whole cloth and a home where no home should be, caused people to expect Martha Stewart, not me. As one childhood friend of Carl's recently said, when I first met you, I thought you had your act together. Then I got to know you. Yes, when they get to know me, they find that I'm disorder personified, and according to many of his childhood friends, the only one nice enough to deserve Carl. I pass, a helium balloon tethered to earth by the string that Carl holds. He grounds me, even as I distract. Except when he distracts, then I ground him. Thus together we resemble a tornado. Two forces of nature, we have wrought destruction with an eye toward rebuilding and healing. 3 decades into our marriage, we've only just begun. So at Crossroads tells the story of how Carl, a trombonist, and I, a writer and sometime activist, ended up here in Jaffrey, living off-grid with chickens, and regales readers with the early stages of our evolution at Darwin's View. The book came out in June of 2020. The book tour we planned ripped off the cross-country whistle-stop book tour with flash readings that Carl and I did for my novel, Bittersweet Manor, back in 2014. For that, we took Amtrak cross-country and back, and public transportation in between to get us to the readings. With Carl as my chauffeur and video photographer, I would stand outside of one or another independent bookstore and read the first paragraph of each successive chapter of the book. 18 chapters, 18 bookstores. And when done, I would say something to the effect of, if you enjoyed this book or are planning on buying the book, please buy it at a local independent bookstore. Because local bookstores, along with blue whales and black rhinos, are endangered species. They are integral to the survival of the web of intellect and community, if not the web of life. In this way, I linked my writing with my politics. For the At Crossroads with Chickens book tour, we had intended to drive our at the time new Model 3 Tesla across the country, stopping at historical spots from Gettysburg to Montgomery to Standing Rock. Lots of places to stop and learn and write about, not least Tesla charging stations. I intended to blog about where the power was coming from, and the pros and cons of solar, coal, nuclear, and natural gas. And then there were the farms we would visit, and the food we would eat, and oh, so many ideas perked up for that road trip, all of which we packed up into a suitcase and shoved into the basement because the coronavirus changed all that. Instead of driving across the country, I walked across the driveway to the chicken coop to the all cooked book tour. That box has my espresso machine in it. I don't go anywhere without it. The hens would chirr during readings and pecked about, playing the part of Greek chorus, interrupting my formulations with their very own personal interpretation of reality, namely that life goes on against all odds and even if the sky is falling. This parallel of the personal and the global, mother and mother nature, is a theme in the book and exhibited itself once again in March of 2020, when my sister and I agreed it would be an idea to bring my New York City mother up to the country for a couple of weeks to ride out the coronavirus blip that had appeared on the screen. And so on March 11th, my mother, her 14th year fighting Parkinson's disease, made the trip from New York to Darwin's View. Broadway, you may remember, shut down on March 12th, and life proceeded in the growing chaos. It snowed in April. That's on the far right, this comes in later on, is the shed, and then comes the bus stop, run, and then the coop. So you'll see pictures of that later. By then, Carl and I had begun to develop plans for Darwin's View with ecological designer and primary author of Edible Forest Gardens, Jaffrey. We were visioning what Darwin's View might be in a human-created but natural, whimsical way, as fossil-free as possible, growing food but leaving time for writing and music, a sense of safety even when the wind is blowing, coyotes are howling, and bobcats prowling, harvesting food and water, root cellaring, a lot of farming words, which on paper are so easy. We would be cogs in a sustainable and sustaining community of food, health, and learning. So, conversations in meeting with Dave, seedlings panting for survival under my tender, loving care, and eventually out into the garden they went, garlic sprouting, that's garlic, potatoes too, and the appearance of disgusting numbers of potato bugs. Apparently, it's all about timing. Farmer friends have told us that if you plant slightly later in early June, the potato bugs come out and there's not leafy bushes to eat. The bugs disappear, the potatoes bloom and sprout, live and learn. And meantime, there was a lot of greenery on our tomato plants, but not much fruit. During the garden visit of another friend, he mentioned it was likely due to the heightening levels of nitrogen in the atmosphere. My heart did a pitter-pat, because the implication was that this was yet another consequence of the climate change people talked about, and against which I had declared war the first winter we were up here, 2013. Yes, as do so many good Americans, whenever they see a fight to be had, I had declared war. Mine was against climate change. You might note it has not gone well. Right up there, we're trying to get money out of politics. Because until we get money out of politics, you aren't going to get most politicians to focus on the issues at hand, fires, floods, and rising temperatures, rather than their major donors who need to increase profits. But I distract. And meantime, here was Mom at Darwin's View, 24/7 caretakers, in and out, the coronavirus possibly on their shoes, which were left out on the porch along with chicken dander and as yet undisinfected bags of groceries. Through the summer, my sister would come up to visit, quarantining in an RV for 2 weeks before moving in for weeks-long visits, providing invaluable assistance with my book tour and meal preparation. Bambi visited too. And whereas our cat Nora had died the previous October, now Nick was showing signs of something, and 2 broody hens. We have one as I speak, that's Toad. They're determined little creatures. They want to sit on eggs until chicks hatch, which is not going to happen if the egg is not fertilized, or the humans lurking don't want chicks in September and they remove the eggs from under her. If you disturb a broody hen by attempting to remove an egg, she will huff and puff and hiss. And if you lift her out of the nest so that her sisters can have their meditative time and lay a happy egg, she will squawk and flap and peck you. And it is hell in the chicken coop when you have a broody hen. Now, not all hens go broody, but when I do at Darwin's View, I typically lose the battle, as happened in the summer of 2020. Susie B went broody. I tried to break her, but with so much else going on, I neglected to persist, and eventually Carl resigned to his fate, and I, thinking it would make life simpler, went to Tractor Supply and adopted 3 French Moran and 2 Isa Brown chicks. It was a Wednesday or Thursday. Chicks arrived newly hatched at stores on Mondays, and these ones were a tad older than usual. I noted a hint of feather in their fluff, but thought nothing of it because I was rapt by the adorable cheeks and innocence of those chicks. As in years past, I put the broody into the nursery coop, and in the dark of the night, Carl and I gently deposited the chicks under the broody hen. Noises of surprise on her part and a gentle rustling. The next morning, I went out to see the happy family. Instead, I found the chicks cowering in the corner and Susie B stomping about, expressing outrage at the world. She didn't want old chicks, she wanted newly hatched chicks. The realization that I would have to be the mother hen provided me with a newfound determination. I picked up Susie B and shoved her into the dog cage that serves as Bun's cat, where she pathetically sought a nest in the dark and quiet, not in the wide open air. But I could not engage because I had 5 chicks to raise, one of whom is our current broody hen, whose timing is entirely off. The other hens are molting. They know it's time to prepare for winter, not chicks. So do I, and so little Wicca has spent the last 4 days in the dog cage. But she's safe, I'm not rude to her. But going back to the fall of 2020, we harvested over 300 garlic heads, many of them as big as my foot. Nick, of our cats, Nick and Nora, had renal failure. Nick is on the right, Nora's on the left, and had to be put down. Soon enough, I developed an obsession with Pet Finder, and my mother paralleled Mother Nature, both seemingly in a slow death spiral, and nothing I could do. Instead of a couple of weeks visit, my mother lived with us for 8 months. She never made it home to New York again, dying at Darwin's View on Thanksgiving Day. Change and adaptation in the growing chaos, climate disruption, the bracing tension of our viewing capitalist society with democracy and profits twisting like the double helix, suddenly healing, slowing down, being home took on a whole new level of necessity. By then, a year and a half into our planning and designing the day, we knew change was coming, massive change on the ground level that began just as we entered into New Hampshire's accessory seasons, black fly and mud. When we first moved up here, we heard talk about our hilltop. The forestry plan we initiated had left the hilltop barren. Even in the middle of summer, it was a brown spot. Dust in the wind, erosion, but we were working on it. We knew we had to heal the land that we stewarded. Time and learning, and it's not there anymore. Soil is alive. And like blue whales, black rhinos, and bookstores, soil is endangered. Our nation's farmers are aging and selling their retirement funds, known as farms, at prices beginning farmers cannot afford. Our farmlands are being lost irrevocably to housing development shopping centers, and the farms that are left are either struggling to survive or too big to fail because the green revolution backfired. What initially increased crop yields, pesticides, insecticides, and chemical fertilizers have left our soils dying and dead. Dead soils don't produce food. The good news is we have the ability to restore those soils by using regenerative agricultural practices that have been used by indigenous, black, and brown people for centuries. We go back to old technologies, practices to sequester carbon, stop soil erosion, and increase wildlife habitat. Using them, even in our ad hoc way, Darwin's View has turned dusty dirt into healthy soil. This summer, we did a lot of work. And when I say we, I now refer to Carl, to Dave Jaffrey, to Aaron Avitz and Tatsura Landscaping, to Doug Clayton, to Peter Kenny, to David Schwab of BS Stonework, and myriad others. Because to do what we did this summer takes community. We planted a wind block to the northwest for European larches, white spruce, and Regent Saskatoons, northern bayberries, American hazelnuts, all joined the Korean nut pine we planted a few years ago, all under the ground in the midst of a drought, and so in need of 4-hour daily waterings. Thank you, Ashley. We put in a wood boiler, part of our aging in place plan. and finally moved the generator that had been sitting too close to the house since our 2016 renovation. We planted a mini dwarf orchard, 18 fruit trees in a drought, but soon enough turned into water and wet roots, which made for unhappy nectarines and apricots, but happy pear trees. Stonework on Tier 1, and a freshwater pond lap pool had a new family of frogs. We built a shed off the garage for Carl's "It will be here someday" electric tractor and to store the pellets for the boiler. Then moving on to find the old woodshed, bus stop, chicken run, and the coop all under one roof. New permanent garden beds. We moved a lot of compost, piles of wood chips and leaves, and pony food from the Newfoundland Pony Sanctuary. The black locust vaccine showed up in early June, and the fence installer in mid-July, by which time the electric tractor had arrived. And 2 roos copied new in late July. If you know anything about the habits of roosters, you can understand why the hens were not happy. Talo and Orangensock had to be rehomed. Fortunately, fortunately, a friend of a friend, Monica, having been assured, that's Talo, and that's Beardo. Actually, that's Orangensock, sorry. Anyway, fortunately, a friend of a friend, Monica, having been assured that those 2 roos would be pets, not soup. Just as Kern came on his way, we dropped them off with our friend, who took them to her friend, who put them in her guest room. Because apparently her food had gotten wet, and she didn't want to put them into anything uncomfortable. So she's even better to her chickens than we are, which is saying something, given our little coop will make a great R&B when the hens ever fly off and leave us. This is another little section of the book. Years ago, one of my cousins had twins. Those 2 pips are men now. I have no idea how that happened, but it did. One of them studies black hole spins, astrophysics. The other studies cell structure, biochemistry. One egg split in 2, and we have twins who study the biggest and the tiniest aspect of the universe in a yin-yang kind of way, because they explore the same thing, if in a different form: energy. Energy is complicated to describe only because everything in the universe is constructed of it. Fortunately, I have the big picture, not the details. When I moved to Darwin's View, I told the energy consultants that I wanted the light switches to work and don't care about how it works. That's Carl's job and Mother Nature's. So I think of energy as fuzzy balls of movement, electrons that don't exist in the physical sense because movements only exist relatively. See the theory of general relativity. So if you try to look at an electron by taking a picture of it, it isn't there because it's moving. And even by attempting to photograph it, you disturb and therefore change it. See Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Electrons hopping around the universe in various forms, they jump from one ring to another, bonding together to make minerals and rocks, or the atoms that make cells that make us. They careen back and forth between me and my chair, Carl and me, the chickens and cats. Energy connects me to everything around me, even to some people I'd rather not be connected to, but still, it's an incredible thought to be so much a part of something and ever changing. Like a shimmering web of vibrations. Go to the very edge of view, and you will find you are part of someone or something else. I get dazzled by that fact. Microbes and mycelium, plants and animals, the stones and soil, water and fire, the stars and planets, mothers and Mother Earth, mother trees, all energy, all movement, and movement is relative. Depending on how one thing moves, so does another. So simple yet overwhelming. Because we are all connected in ways we cannot see, but are minutely and directly affected by, then it matters how we move and what we do. Everything we do matters. They get a little heady here. In his book, Existential Psychotherapy, Irvin D. Yalom writes that there are 4 basic things humans fear: death, isolation, meaninglessness, freedom. He writes that people fear freedom because freedom isn't about doing whatever we want to do. Freedom requires us to use our free will. Free will means willing, making choices and taking responsibility for the consequences of those choices. Is that not the gauntlet thrown? We are responsible for the consequences of our choices. Chaos theory, as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is the mathematical study of complex systems whose behavior is highly sensitive to slight changes in conditions, so that small alterations can give rise to strikingly great consequences. Is that not exciting? Small changes can lead to great consequences. Granted, the necessary change, the massive change needed to deal with today's situation has to happen on a governmental level, and to paraphrase Greta Thunberg, all we get is blah, blah, blah from governments, the thrall of profit-driven corporations, and climate disruption seems to be coming at us at an uncomfortable train wreck speed. But if we're all connected, if everything we do matters, if the slightest alteration can give rise to strikingly great consequences, if, as Eleanor Roosevelt wrote in her book, we live by learning, we learn by living, when the human race faces life head on, it can almost remake itself, then I would suggest it is time to embrace small change in the hope of creating massive change. 100 years ago, the same energy that is swirling about us now, the swirl, hate, evil, a great divide between worldviews. Individuals came together and good eventually won. For a while, here we are again. In times that, to paraphrase Paul Gilding in his book, The Great Disruption, are no longer about what we want to do, but what we must do. Death, isolation, meaninglessness. Last week, I couldn't save our sweet hen, Little Red, from an illness that was killing her. I could not save Nora from cancer, or Nick from renal failure, or my mother from Parkinson's disease. So much of life is out of our control. But we planted 60 trees and bushes this summer. Those trees and bushes are a foot tall, wispy. It will be decades for them to create the wind block we imagine and to produce the nuts that they will fruit. Likely as not, Carl and I will not live to see them in their heyday. But as with so much else we have done, we didn't plant them for ourselves. Planting those trees was an act of hope for the future. We, Carl and I, and the incredible people we have met and worked with here, hope against all odds. Because it is not the world that needs saving. The earth will be different but fine once we start harming her or disappear. What needs saving is our humanity, our caring for each other and for our fellow sentient beings. That is how we have survived in the past. That requires reaching out with love, not hate, building community, not isolating, gifting, not commodifying. Carl and I have been able to do what we have because we have our individual skill sets, talents, and energy. I flip switches. He makes sure they work. And every decision we make, every choice, from what cat food we buy to what batteries we use to power the house, to is this plastic recyclable, repurposable, reusable, organic trash, is relentlessly reviewed and debated. And that brand new electric tractor that runs on the power we harvest from the sun, that fabulous tractor that was to lower our carbon footprint, that piece of the bleeding edge of the cutting edge of technology, it has issues. Carl's been on the phone with Solartrek and they're working hard on it. They flew someone here from California this week to fix it. Turns out a part needs to be replaced. So that was being shipped from India, and then guys had to fly back here from California to put it in. Our tractor's carbon footprint is out of the roof, and our best of intentions have been laid to waste. But that's what it is to skid along the razor blade edge of technology in hopes that there might be a tipping point. That maybe someday all the tractors out there, at all, then may they still exist because we choose to support local, small, independent farms as well as bookstores. All those tractors might someday be run by the sun. A butterfly's wing flapping here today might cause a tornado in the Kansas plains of the future. Meantime, we begin a new chapter. Who knows what that will bring? We know it won't be perfection, but it will be good. It will be done and likely redone because, as Carl likes to say, anything worth doing once is worth doing twice. As the chaos grows, the soil heals, and hope is gone. Thank you.
Well, I went to college in Providence, and you can't live that way in Providence, Rhode Island. I forgot to acknowledge and thank Beltex for sponsoring this program, which is much appreciated. And Beltex has been very supportive, as we all know, of the Civic Center and other institutions in Jaffrey. I also forgot to encourage people online to use the chat room and raise questions. And we have some time, and if I think I'll ask the first question, the prerogative of the chair. And the question I have is this. When I think of the grid, I think of the electrical system and the connectedness, except for Texas, apparently, among the states, the electrical system. Now, you are living off the grid. And my question is whether you partake of the systems that make up the grid, not just the electrical, but others as well.
You want to answer that? The short answer is no, we don't partake, right? But
We make our own electricity.
Carl, stand up and introduce yourself.
I'm Tory's husband.
I first thought he was a trombonist, which he is, but as you can see, he's much more. Go ahead, Carl.
So, yes, we make our own electricity, but we do purchase propane that we store to power our generator should the sun not give us enough electricity. And then we cook with our propane. And we burn wood, but that's through, you could call that a grid of sorts. There's a grid of supply, and that, so we don't generate everything we need there, but we could, I suppose. Because we've been chipping away, trying to use less and less of what the grid makes good. So we started with electricity, and we store electricity in our basement in batteries, and we use it, and we have about enough to get us through a couple days of zero sun. So that's about the extent of it. But we have 2 electric cars and an electric tractor, and they're all, we try to charge them all at home. And the cars have about twice as much storage as the house has. So you can guess that is a tough little juggling match trying to keep the house storage up and the car storage up so that you have enough to get to the market if you got it or whatever. But it's an interesting balance.
In an emergency, can you
Now,
draw?
take off your mask so we can all hear you.
In an emergency, can you draw power from cars?
No, not with the systems they have now. It's an interesting, yeah. In different countries, they, like Japan made the Nissan Leaf. And the first versions of the Nissan Leaf had a plug that you plug directly into your house, and so the energy can go either way.
and we've gone on YouTube, and people have jerry-rigged their cars to go into reverse, but it would be a real bummer if it didn't work.
Yes, take off your mask and speak loudly, please.
So I want to know, how do you carve out time with all that this requires? How do you carve out time for both of your creative endeavors? Is it a conscious, okay, I have to put these hours into, my music and my writing, or is it?
For me is yes. I basically try to write in the morning, and then I am looking out the door and seeing everybody else do all the work that I'm supposed to be taking in, so I then have to start. So it's a juggle, and it's taken me a while to realize that Darwin's view is as much a part of the creative process as the writing is. And of course, Carl, you can talk to yourself about this last year and a half of music. So.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting hole in time because COVID has created that for me. I can't perform because it's I'd have to.
He is
I'd have to,
aerosol.
like, put myself in a bag. I'm an aerosol. Yeah, so I've basically not been performing. So I do try to get into the studio and carve out that time, but there's certain times of year it's harder to do than others, especially as this has been ramping up and we've been taking on more and more of the farming type stuff.
Everybody should know, you don't just play the trombone. You're a real, exceptional musician that's quite famous. And I don't know how many people in here know that.
I don't know about fame. I've been at it for a long time.
Are there any online?
I haven't seen, so far, no one has typed in a question into the chat, though they're encouraged to do so.
Yes, take off your mask, please.
Yes.
Speak up.
The only element of your composition there that I'm not understanding is what appears to be a lap pool.
Yes.
Is that actually water storage or is it more recreational?
It's been a challenge.
Okay.
That is indeed, it is a freshwater lap pond. The Garden Arts installed it for us in 2016 when we were doing a lot of renovations. It's on the left-hand side there, you can see that's where the water, some filtration of plants are in there and they clean that out. And there's also another filter that helps it, but it's basically it's natural. Frogs are living in there, tadpoles, snails, and it's amazing.
So to your point about
Yes.
water storage, when we first built the house, the fire department expressed concern about the access to water up there. And so we started thinking about ways to store water. And you might notice that through the land, there are swales cut into the hillside and there's a little pond at the top and there's another big swale. So we've sort of tried to focus on ways of capturing water that just comes down. So the pool, we do top it off with, we have had to buy water to fill the
Really
pool
counterintuitive.
because we've been sort of trying to figure out ways to keep that water through the winter. But as it stands, we have 2 cisterns to store water that has fallen on the roof of the house. So we capture that water and then we top off the pool with that. And we try to keep as much water up there as we can.
Hold it. Sean, we have
So this is a comment from Julian Brooks. And Julian says, thank you for your beautiful presentation, Tory. You spoke to the importance of community in building this space. How do you plan to include community in your vision as time goes on?
How, Tory, will you include community in your vision? That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. Well, it's funny because I was just saying to Carl yesterday that one of the things that this last year and a half has done is that we have made Darwin's View way bigger. Those gardens are much bigger than Carl and I can do if we're continuing on with our art and trying to make that we do need help. And we do, and we're Aaron Avis and Doug Clayton are 2 people that we've been working with. They're starting A22 down there, which is going to be natural native plant nursery, and we're trying to figure that there's going to be a lot of climate refugees coming in. As I mean, already there are a lot of people moving from California, moving from where the fires have been going on, and we're working on that. I mean, since we've been up there, it's always been bigger than us. It's an incredible piece of property. We're blessed because some people who are in the audience here, so this is the backdoor neighbor, the land behind us. So we've got the whole northern part of this is now protected, and we're going to be eventually putting it into conservation easement. Before we do that, we don't want to prevent it so that we can't have people come and put housing up on. Anyway, this is what happens. We start thinking and forgetting, because you can see it's huge. But I think we're thinking yurts, we're thinking small, because we need to go through the town.
But it's also an idea of generating food to more than we can consume ourselves and getting that out to the community.
And I'm just gonna share this, even though I probably shouldn't, you're gonna shoot me for this, because we're not doing this. But we've had fantasies of getting a building in downtown Jaffrey, which is, Jaffrey does not have, we are basically a food desert unless you want to be eating donuts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's very insulting to all the wonderful businesses here, and I don't mean that as an insult, but if you want to go and grocery shop, you don't tend to come to Jaffrey. To open a farmer's market, grocery store, coffee house, something where people in Jaffrey and around, all those hikers who go hiking, people going to the park theater could come there, buy local produce. Anyway, it's a whole fantasy that we've talked about for about 4 or 5 years now. And we slowly meet people, but we haven't met the people. We want to do that. So Julian, come on over. Because we need younger, active, energetic people, because we're not so young anymore.
Question, take off your mask, please.
Okay. Off the grid used to mean building a log cabin in Alaska and being really off the grid, right? So, but how much are you guys on the communications grid? How dependent are you on? Are you really in contact with everyone as the rest of the world is with email and all of the things you got to deal with on that?
Yeah.
Sure. And, you know, Tory will tell you that I'm a gadget guy. So I have, you know, our system is connected to the internet, our batteries, I can check the batteries from
If he ever
Providence,
wants
Rhode
to sell,
Island. I can, you know, I can check on the house all the time. You know, we're totally connected to the grid that way.
yeah, I like to call us 21st century off grid.
I understand.
We're very much, and we use Y Valley, which means we still don't have any wires to the house. But we use, it's sort of like a hotspot.
It's
kind
an
of-
antenna.
It's an antenna. So we are connected.
So you're not Thoreau going to Walden
That's right.
to be alone for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes, take off your mask, please.
I heard, I heard you talk about planting trees along the property, and most of them were fruit trees. But you have some other varieties for woodberry, or what were they?
They were, your
With
European
barrier,
larch,
European larch and some white spruce and,
bayberry.
and so the wooden break is probably about 100-foot stretch to the northwest of the house. And so it's multi-layered, and the first layer is down the hill, so it's the tall white spruce,
Yeah.
which are about this big right now.
Right, yeah.
And then it grows shorter and you get up to a nut pine at the top. So that's near
Mostly
the house.
pine.
Mostly and
And hazelnuts.
yeah, evergreen, except for the larch, which we're also trying to work with the view. We don't want to cut our view off with the windbreak.
Right, so you want them to only grow so, trees that only grow so high.
Yeah, or be able to see through them. So the design is pathways
Yeah.
and diagonals to the wind, and trying to set that all up. We'll never get to see it work, but we hope it will.
I admire your planning for the future. It's good to plan these things, you realize that half a century to a century. Doesn't know where it's fruit or fruit.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, oh, wait a minute, in the back.
Yeah, what kind of food staples, if any, do you have to buy in
Well, coffee, very important. This is sort of the delicate dance I dance because, oh, you live off grid, oh, you're farming, and we're very connected to our surroundings. I am a city person. I am used to being able to, go to restaurants and stuff. So we don't need to buy garlic, and we won't, if our potatoes ever get to me, we don't need to buy potatoes ever again. We are part of a CSA just because, number one, we want to support a CSA, and I don't trust, we luckily had a CSA this year because nothing really got in there that grew except for the volunteer butternut squash, and then porcupine. So the big staples, you know, the olive oils, Carl bought some, wheat, like the real wheat, the little seeds. And we have a grinder, and so I put the seeds into the grinder, and out comes this incredible flour that really doesn't like to rise. So I'm still working, it's only in the last couple of months, but, so we're trying to do things that were more to the original thing, but salt, sugar I'm trying to cut out, but there it is. So, you know, the staples, Carl made us maple syrup, so, it's much, it's fun. So
Yeah,
it's,
it takes a
does
lot
that
of
answer your
time. Yeah,
Yes,
Given that you have so much wind, I'm not seeing any wind power there.
yeah, it's an
So
interesting
what's
point.
that about?
Well, it's because there's maintenance involved with the moving parts of the wind turbine. And so when we first did the site evaluation, we invited a few people up, and one of them was a wind installer. And he told us that the technical equation is that anything, you have to be 40 feet above anything within 300 feet in order to generate a steady flow of power. And so he was saying basically that you needed a 100-foot tower up there if it was going to be anywhere near the house, because of where the house was positioned. So a 100-foot tower scares me. So I don't want to have to take something down and make it do maintenance. I'm really hoping that someone's going to invent low-level wind generators that are actually, I've looked at a lot of them over the years, and they all seem to have their issues and problems. So the solar panels, they just sit there and generate power. And it's just amazing to me, but it works, and we love it.
thank you for the great question. He was ready for that question. Think Dr. Massey. Speak loud.
I'm thinking about those beautiful fruit trees and how are they pollinated? Are you including bees?
we it is incredible this last year, the numbers of wasps, flies, bees, everything, just by the buckwheat and the oats and everything that's in the different flowers that we had up there. We are not tending to these ourselves. Last year I was talking with Jarvis and Marcia at the Hancock Inn, and they were in touch with somebody in Boston who was looking for places to put bees and we just have, I mean, we need community. We would need to have somebody take care of them for us. And then there's bears. But I've never actually seen a bear up there. Carl says he has, and our niece says she has, so.
You will if you put in beehives.
Exactly.
We have a bear right here in Jaffrey, so.
Yeah,
Over here, if I could speak up.
This is all really interesting and great. And so I had a couple of questions. One is that, are you using the liver permaculture techniques? You're talking about David and Doug, and I know, but are you considering having animals, like an Alan Savory kind of process?
Yeah, that's been a constant conversation with us, and it's time. It's another block of time that it takes in your life. And
Carl has to be very careful because my birthday is on Monday, and friends of ours have 2 goats that are going to go into the freezer if we don't adopt them. So I really, this is the wrong time right now. We need to get through the winter and sort of gel. Sorry, I had to say.
Good.
yeah.
Hey, could I ask a follow-up question to that? This is all really inspiring to me what you're doing. Could you talk a little bit about any challenges or what the process was to get the zoning for all of this? Because you're typically in Jaffrey, not Dublin, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Was it challenging, or because Dublin set precedent, was that easier?
We're really out there.
The question for everybody, including those online, is whether Carl and Tory had problems with zoning and other kinds of legal restrictions.
So when we bought the property, you went,
Go for it.
2006, 2007, there was 2 pieces of property that we kept separate for a while, and the main issues we had was putting the logging road in, that someday would be a driveway, but until we had the plans for for the house, it couldn't be a driveway, so they couldn't tell us if we could actually build up there, and they give us permission. So getting up there in the first place was something, but since then, we joined the 2 properties, we have the driveway up, it's across, there's the only top of the hill is not in conservation easement, so everything beyond us has to be only agricultural stuff, so it's really just the top of the hill, and what am I forgetting?
Well, we had to cross a wetland just about the beginning there, and so that was difficult. We also, when we first started the project, we didn't have access to a class 5 road. We only had a class 6 road access. And so that was a problem. We had to gain access to the class 5 road to access the property. Really, the town wasn't going to let us build without that. So we ended up having to buy another lot to get that access. And that was, but you know, other than that, the town has been great to work with. Everybody's been pretty open to everything we've been.
And I think part of the difference, I mean, if we try to sell anything, if we try to make this a business, it might, I mean, again, 822 is sort of right on the road, and they were worried, I think the town was worried about traffic and parking and stuff. Yeah, and this isn't going to be that. If we had, I mean, I think our neighbors at one point when we were first meeting and believed that food is a right, not a privilege. And I sort of lean towards that. I think it's more of a, you know, I haven't read a lot about the gifting economy and just having food that people can have. And we're in a situation that we can be generous, but again, we're sort of a moving target right now because we just finished a lot of stuff and now we've got to sit still for a while, which we're not very good at. But comes, you know, this winter and the spring, we're going to be talking about animals. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not, you know, our chickens are pets, and I eat the eggs. And that eats chickens. Just saying. So the animals would be pets, but it would be kind of wonderful. I was watching a very sweet video because I was in the hinterlands of technology. About a woman who saved a cow, and she just was this wonderful person who was just saving all these animals. I wish I was that dedicated.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Now, yes, take off your mask, please.
A few years ago, when my class was up there painting, you had a bunch of goats that belonged to somebody that were supposed to clear a big portion of your land there. Were they successful?
So that was Gap Mountain Goats, and they're over here on in Jaffrey. And yeah, we rented from them, and what I wouldn't say it was as successful as we had hoped. We put them on about 3 acres, and we had 9 goats, and we should have had them penned in a lot tighter and moved them when they finished what they were supposed to do. What ended up happening was they ate everything they liked, and then by the time they got back to the beginning, the stuff they liked was growing again, so they never ate the stuff they didn't like. So we ended up with a lot of
One more question, anybody? Okay, I'll ask it. I do that for a living, ask stupid questions. And my question is this. Obviously, if you take on something this complicated, this challenging, not everything can turn out right the first time. Can you tell us something that went wrong?
Where to begin? You go.
Oh, man. Well, you know, the technological things. We have constant monitoring of the electrical generation. power generation. And I often forget, and I'll leave the car plugged in, and about 10 o'clock at night, everything will shut off. And it's, uh-oh, the car is just drained the house. You know,
And then you're gonna hear the generator turn.
then the
which just makes
generator
it
turns
all
on.
those split things.
But that's, you know, that's just one of the technological. On the natural side, I don't know how many plants we put in that are no longer with us. But,
Russ Darwin's field.
you know, we used to go by there's a guy named Mark Shepard, who's a permaculture designer, and he had a system of planting he called the stun technique. And stun stood for sheer, total, utter neglect. And if it can live through that, it deserves to be here. And so we kind of look at our thing as sort of stun, but it's not out of knowledge. It's more out of lack of knowledge that we stun things.
Well, I want to thank you, Tory, and you, Carl. You've really taken us into your confidence in a sense. It's been an intimate kind of conversation, which I see we have another McCagg online.
That's right, sister.
Hello, Xander. And speaking of sustainable power and electricity, wind power, and the like, our next speaker, the first Friday of November, is a man who lives in Keene named Bob King, whose life's calling is sustainable energy. He owns and operates hydroelectric plants. He is totally committed to helping all of us find better types of energy and live a greener existence. So tell your friends, please come back in December. Heather Ames will speak about her very interesting career assisting international adoptees who wish to do so reconnect with their biological families. Fascinating subject. And in the new year, we have any number of interesting speakers, one of whom a fairly recent arrival in the Nanook area named Bob Beck happens to be in the room, lives in Peterborough, has spent a great part of his life in various countries around the world, and he was in the American Embassy in Syria during a terrorist attack. He will speak about that. Martha and Jeff Crocker will be speaking in a few months about their pioneering experiences. She is the first woman lawyer in Cheshire County. He as a member of the first Jewish family in Jaffrey. Then we have Jean Duval, whom many of you know, who will talk to us about her career as an artist. And I'm sure I have forgotten one or two of our upcoming speakers, but it should be a lively series on a wide variety of topics. I think this was a good turnout between online and those of you who are here. So now everybody, Rebecca has refreshments for us, and Tori, you'll stick around and we can chat for a few minutes. Thanks so much for coming.